A millionaire, en route to the airport, glimpses a beggar with a baby in the pouring rain and hands her the keys to his house. But when he returns, the reality he finds is nothing like he expected. Rain cascaded relentlessly over New York City, transforming the once bustling streets into a vast sea of umbrellas and shimmering reflections across the wet asphalt. The drops hit Grayson's windshield like tiny explosions of water, but he barely noticed the storm. His mind was consumed with the details of his upcoming business presentation, meticulously planning each move as the CEO of one of the largest financial corporations in the city. His life, like his business, was a series of calculated steps, each one carefully timed to perfection. Emotions were something reserved for fleeting moments outside the corporate battlefield, where practicality reigned supreme. But on that particular day, something was about to disrupt his carefully orchestrated rhythm. At a red light, Roman's gaze fell on a figure that stood out starkly against the usual chaos of the city. On the corner of the sidewalk, a young woman cradled a baby in her arms, shielding the fragile child from the downpour with what little of her body she could offer. Her coat, tattered and drenched, clung to her thin frame, and her arms, barely able to wrap securely around the child, shook with a mixture of exhaustion and helplessness. Roman, who had been deep in thought, found himself glancing at her through the rearview mirror. For a fleeting moment, he felt an unfamiliar stir within him, a subtle yet undeniable sensation that unsettled the impassive wall he had built around himself. Before this unexpected distraction could fully settle in his mind, Roman's attention shifted back to his destination. But as the light flickered from red to green, something inside him shifted. A surge of empathy, one that he had long learned to suppress, rose up in an undeniable wave. He lowered the car window, momentarily at a loss for words. The young woman hesitated, her uncertain gaze flitting between him and the road ahead, clearly wary of the stranger offering her help. Roman's eyes caught the way she barely managed to hold the baby, the rain now a relentless downpour soaking them both. The drops trickled down her face, mingling with what could only be described as silent tears. Tears she didn't even try to wipe away. Almost instinctively, Roman gestured for her to come closer, and, to his own surprise, opened the car door, an action driven by an impulse he hadn't anticipated. "Get in," he said, his voice a strange mix of firmness and unexpected gentleness. The woman stood frozen for a moment, suspicion flickering across her face, but the overwhelming need to protect her child seemed to override her doubts. Slowly, she climbed into the back seat, her arms cradling the baby with utmost care. Without a word, Roman sped away from the curb, his mind racing as he adjusted the car's heater, trying to fight the chill creeping into the car. Despite her attempts to hide it, he could see her body trembling, and as their eyes met in the rearview mirror for a brief moment, he saw not just exhaustion, but a quiet, unwavering strength. She wasn't just a victim of circumstance. There was a dignity about her, a proud resilience that made it clear she was not someone who would ask for help unless it was absolutely necessary. Roman, though perplexed by his own actions, found himself more curious than ever. Without fully understanding why, he altered his route. Instead of heading straight for the airport, he turned the car toward his mansion, a grand estate that, despite its opulence, had always felt devoid of warmth or human connection. "What's your name?" he asked, his voice softer now, wanting to reassure her he wasn't a threat. "Isadora," she replied, her voice barely audible above the hum of the engine. "And this is Arya," she added, her gaze softening as she looked down at her daughter, offering the faintest of protective smiles. Roman nodded, offering no further questions. The silence between them settled in, surprisingly comfortable despite the oddness of the situation. The sleek, polished interior of the car, the warmth now enveloping them both, and the fleeting sense of safety, brought on by an unexpected act of kindness, felt almost surreal to Isadora. Roman couldn't shake the feeling that something about Isadora had struck a chord deep within him, something that reached back to a time in his life he preferred to keep buried. But rather than confront the discomfort of those memories, he chose to focus on the practicality of his decision. He was no stranger to making quick, calculated choices, and this one, though uncharacteristic, felt like a step toward something he couldn't quite understand. Minutes later, the car came to a halt in front of Alexander's sprawling mansion. The modern building loomed before them, its glass windows gleaming under the rain, while a meticulously manicured garden stretched out in every direction. Isadora's eyes widened in disbelief, her gaze fixed on the impressive sight in front of her. She didn't speak, her mind scrambling to comprehend what had just transpired. Roman exited the car swiftly, moving around to open the back door and offer his assistance. "You can stay here until I get back," he said, his voice carrying an air of finality as he handed her a sleek, silver key. The words felt almost mechanical, as if he, too, was still processing the magnitude of his decision. Isadora's fingers trembled as they closed around the key. Her mind reeled in confusion, unable to fully grasp the magnitude of the offer. She had long grown accustomed to the looks of disdain and rejection from others, never expecting someone to act with such unprompted kindness, especially not a man like Roman. Everything about him suggested coldness, distance, a world apart from the hardships she had known. "Sir, I don't know how to thank you," she murmured, her voice thick with emotion, the weight of exhaustion and the unfamiliar comfort of compassion pressing in on her. "No need to thank me," Roman replied curtly, avoiding her gaze. The vulnerability in her voice, though sincere, made him uncomfortable, an awkwardness he wasn't used to. "Just take care of her. And yourself. I'll be back tomorrow." Without another word, he turned and walked briskly back to his car, his focus already shifting to the business matters awaiting him, the flight he had to catch, the meeting that could shape the future of his company. All of it loomed large in his mind, yet as the car sped toward the airport, an odd, nagging feeling lingered. Something about Isadora had stirred him in a way he hadn't experienced in years. He couldn't explain it, and he didn't want to. It was easier to bury the feeling than to confront whatever it was that had drawn him to her. Inside the mansion, Isadora entered with silent awe, her senses overwhelmed. The warmth of the house wrapped around her like a gentle embrace, the soft scent of fresh linens and polished wood filling the air. Everything around her, the luxury, the opulence, felt like a distant, unattainable dream. With each step she took through the grandiose foyer, the mansion seemed to grow larger, more imposing. She held Arya close to her chest, the weight of the baby grounding her in a reality that felt far removed from the harshness of the streets she'd known for so long. The living room, with its elegant furniture, carefully curated art pieces, and the sparkling crystal chandelier above, looked like something out of a fantasy. It was too perfect, too surreal to be real. Yet there she was, walking through it as though she had been invited into someone else's life. A life she had never known but longed for. This mansion, this improbable sanctuary, was now hers, even if only for a night. Later, she found a spacious room with a large plush bed, something she had never been able to offer Arya. The sight of her daughter's eyes lighting up as she looked around the luxurious room brought a bittersweet smile to Isadora's face. In that fleeting moment, she allowed herself to feel something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in a long time. Genuine happiness. For a brief while, she could forget about survival. She could see Arya safe, surrounded by comfort, and in that, she found a kind of peace. As the storm continued its furious assault outside, Isadora let herself sink into the comfort of the bed. Arya nestled against her. She closed her eyes, finally allowing herself to breathe deeply, to let go of some of the tension that had built up over the years. The mansion was a refuge, a miraculous, fleeting refuge, and it was all she had, all she needed, at least for tonight. As she closed the door behind her, Isadora felt the years of torment, of cold streets, of constant fear, and of doubt, perhaps for the first time, begin to lift. It was as though she had left all of that outside, on the other side of the pristine walls of the mansion, the polished furniture, the tall windows that offered a view of the rain-slicked garden. Everything here was alien to her, yet somehow it felt like a dream she didn't want to wake from. Her eyes traced the contours of the vast, elegant room, as if trying to absorb every detail to make sure it wasn't just an illusion. In her arms, Arya slept soundly, her tiny chest rising and falling with each peaceful breath. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt her daughter was truly safe. That was all that mattered, at least for now. Isadora knew, with a clarity that surprised her, that this chance, improbable and fleeting as it was, felt like a small miracle. For someone like her, someone who had lived without a permanent address or stable shelter for so long, this moment of safety was unimaginable. The thought that she could sleep through the night without the gnawing worry of where she might end up by morning was a luxury beyond comprehension. As she looked around, her eyes fell on an open kitchen, its gleaming appliances reflecting the soft light. It felt surreal, almost too good to be true. Hesitation crept in, like an old, familiar companion, but hunger quickly overwhelmed any doubts. Since losing her home, the opportunities for a decent meal had become rare, and the idea of cooking with fresh ingredients had long since vanished from her world. The thought of creating something nourishing for herself and Arya, for the first time in ages, stirred something deep within her. A longing for normalcy she hadn't allowed herself to feel. She gently laid Arya down on one of the sofas, checking to ensure that the little one remained deeply asleep, her chest rising and falling peacefully. Then, with careful steps, Isadora walked to the kitchen. The cabinets, impeccably organized, revealed a bounty of food that seemed almost unreal. Fruits, vegetables, and dairy products, all fresh and inviting. The sight of it nearly made her pause, as if she feared the whole thing might disappear. She opened the refrigerator, her fingers trembling as she reached inside, drawn to the vibrant produce and the promise of a real meal. With a quiet determination, she gathered a few ingredients: eggs, some vegetables, and a slice of homemade bread. Each motion, though simple, felt significant. She cracked the eggs into a skillet, stirring them gently, the warmth of the cooking filling the kitchen with a soft, comforting scent. Isadora closed her eyes for a moment, savoring the feeling. For most people, cooking was just a routine, a daily task, but for her it had come to represent something far deeper: stability, security, and a long-lost sense of control that had been stripped away in the chaos of her life. The aroma of the eggs cooking was a small pleasure, one that brought a quiet smile to her lips. It was familiar yet long forgotten. She cut small pieces for Arya, imagining the look of delight that would dance across her daughter's face when she tasted a meal prepared with care and love. In just a few minutes, the simple yet nourishing meal was ready. Isadora sat at the table, her heart warm with a quiet sense of gratitude. Her eyes, though tired, reflected a deep sense of relief. The smell of the food roused Arya, and Isadora lifted her gently, her hands moving with a tenderness born not just of love, but of an overwhelming need to protect her daughter from the harshness of the world. Arya's small hands reached up, a smile forming on her face as her eyes sparkled with innocent joy. Isadora fed her slowly, savoring the quiet moments of happiness that came with each bite Arya took. It was a simple scene, one that might seem mundane to most, but for Isadora, it was a stolen piece of normalcy, a brief respite from the struggle that had been her reality for so long. As they ate, Isadora allowed herself to relax for the first time in months. Each bite of food, each shared moment with her daughter, brought a sense of renewal to her body and soul. What was, to most, a humble meal felt like a feast in that moment, a moment of peace, a brief interlude in the storm that had been her life. After dinner, Isadora turned her attention to Arya, who had found a spoon and was playing with it as though it were the most precious of treasures. Isadora watched her with a serene expression, her heart swelling with gratitude. She stood, moving around the house in search of a place to give Arya a warm bath, and maybe, just maybe, take one herself. She wandered into the master bathroom, her breath catching in her throat as she took in the grandeur of the space. White marble walls gleamed under soft lighting, and the heated floors felt like a luxury she had never imagined. The bathtub, large enough for two, stood at the center of the room, an overwhelming symbol of a life that felt so distant from her own. It was a world she didn't belong to, and yet, here she was, in the middle of it, with the chance to provide comfort for her daughter. Isadora took a deep breath, steeling herself. This wasn't her world, but for tonight she could give Arya something she'd never had: a safe, warm bath. She filled the tub with water, watching as steam began to rise from the surface. Gently, she undressed Arya, her hands moving with care before lowering her into the warm water. Arya's face lit up with surprise and delight as the heat enveloped her, her small body immediately relaxing into the soothing warmth. The little one giggled and splashed, the sound of her laughter echoing around the marble bathroom, transforming the space into a bubble of pure joy. Isadora's heart fluttered at the sight, her eyes following every movement of her daughter. She washed Arya's tiny fingers, her face, taking her time to ensure every inch of her was clean, warm, and loved. Afterward, she wrapped her daughter in a soft robe she had found in the closet, the fabric plush against Arya's skin. For the first time in a long time, Isadora felt like she could breathe, like her daughter could rest, safe and free from worry. And though the future remained uncertain, tonight they had this moment. And for now, it was enough. After taking care of Arya, Isadora finally allowed herself to step into the bath. The warm water enveloped her body like a gentle embrace, washing over her skin and carrying away the remnants of time, the aches, the grime, and the painful memories of countless nights spent in the cold. As she closed her eyes, her mind briefly wandered back to a time when she had a home, when she had dreams as bright as the sun, and the future seemed like an open road. But life, with its sharp, unpredictable turns, had led her down paths she never could have foreseen, teaching her in harsh lessons that destiny was not always kind or just. She stepped out of the bath, feeling the fresh air of renewal. It was as if in the process she had left a part of her pain behind, swirling away with the water that drained from the tub. She found a soft robe hanging nearby and wrapped herself in it, the fabric warm against her skin. For a moment, she stood there, feeling embraced, almost as though she were caught in a dream that was, for once, gentle and kind. In the king-size bed, Arya was already drifting into a peaceful sleep, her small form curled up beneath the blankets. Pillows, something so simple yet so rare in Isadora's world, supported her daughter's head. The sight made Isadora's chest tighten with relief, a quiet, exhausted sigh escaping her lips. She lay beside her, holding Arya close, her daughter's warmth a comfort that soothed her own wearied soul. As she settled, her mind began to float between gratitude for the safety they had and the quiet flicker of hope that had somehow found its way back into her heart. With Arya snuggled peacefully in her arms, the weight of months of hardship finally caught up to her. Exhaustion flooded in like a tide, pulling her into a deeper rest than she had allowed herself in so long. The soft scent of clean sheets filled her senses, and the warmth of the room, cocooned from the storm outside, wrapped her in safety. She knew this night was precious, a gift she didn't take for granted. What the morning would bring, she didn't know, but for tonight, she had decided to set aside her fears. For the first time in what felt like forever, Isadora allowed herself to drift into sleep without the usual gnawing anxiety. A strange peace, like a balm to her soul, enveloped her. The shadows of her past seemed to dissolve, fading into the recesses of her mind as she took a deep breath and sank into a deep, restorative sleep. In her dreams, images of her old life, her past, before everything had unraveled, came to the surface. She was young again, full of promise and brimming with plans. A time when everything seemed possible, when she had a future she believed was within reach. She remembered the days when she was a dedicated student, pushing herself to excel, believing she could make a difference. She had worked so hard to get into one of New York's top medical schools, overcoming every obstacle in her path. She had fought tirelessly to become the first in her family to earn a degree, driven by the dream of one day helping others as a doctor. Her professors had recognized her talent, and her passion for medicine had shone through in her tireless dedication. She had been on the cusp of something extraordinary, until everything changed. The dream faded into the shadows of her subconscious, and Isadora shifted in bed, pulling Arya closer. The present comfort of this moment, the warmth of the bed and the sound of her daughter's peaceful breathing, surrounded her, and for the first time in ages, she didn't have nightmares. Instead, she dreamed of a life where she could offer Arya a childhood free of hardship and fear, a life where her daughter could grow up knowing stability, love, and safety. As the first rays of sunlight began to filter softly into the room, Isadora slowly awoke, still hovering between sleep and reality. The room was silent, save for the soft, steady rhythm of Arya's breathing beside her. Isadora glanced at her daughter's serene face and felt her heart swell with quiet affection. A smile tugged at her lips as she studied the peaceful innocence of Arya's sleep. That night had been more than just rest. It had been a reminder that hope still existed, even for someone like her. She rose gently, careful not to disturb her daughter, and breathed in deeply, the soft air of the morning filling her lungs. Isadora was determined now, not just to survive, but to do whatever it took to keep this peace, this fragile hope, alive. She wasn't sure what the future would bring, but she knew that, for Arya, she would keep fighting. She would hold on to this moment as proof that a better life was possible, even if it was just for now. The soft bed, the warmth of the blanket, and Arya's calm, contented face beside her all reminded her of something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long: safety. A brief but tangible feeling of having found a sanctuary. But as her gaze wandered around the elegant surroundings, the large windows casting soft morning light over the room, the plush furnishings that seemed so out of place, her thoughts began to shift. And with that shift, memories from her past returned, unbidden, as turbulent and powerful as a rushing river. Isadora never imagined that she would one day be homeless. She had once been young, strong, and full of dreams. Dreams that felt almost tangible, just within her reach. She had worked so hard to get into medical school, one of the top schools in New York, and had overcome countless challenges to get there. She had been the first in her family to make it to college, and every step she took had been fueled by the desire to build a better future. Not just for herself, but for those she loved. She had been known as a bright student, one of the most promising in her class. Her passion for medicine had been evident in everything she did. She had dreams of becoming a doctor, of making a difference in the world. Dreams that had seemed not only possible, but inevitable. Yet, as life often does, it had shattered those dreams in an instant. And now she was here, in this mansion, surrounded by luxury she never imagined, all the while trying to hold on to a small shred of hope for the future. From a young age, Isadora had been the embodiment of compassion. Her mother often spoke of how, even as a child, Isadora had always cared for the small animals in the neighborhood, tending to injured birds, stray kittens, and any creature that seemed to need a little extra love. Kindness was her nature, and she had always tried to ease the suffering of others. It seemed that everything was in place for her to build a future filled with purpose, especially in her chosen path of medicine. But everything changed the day she lost her parents in a tragic accident. The memory of that night was etched in her mind, clear and painful. The late-night phone call, the hollow sound of the voice on the other end, and the incomprehensible, gut-wrenching realization that her life as she knew it had just shattered into 1,000 pieces. The world she had once understood, with its steady rhythm and secure foundation, crumbled in seconds. Her parents' deaths robbed her not just of family, but of the emotional anchor that had kept her grounded, that had given her the strength to keep moving forward. Grief consumed her, heavy, suffocating. The pain, once confined to her heart in quiet solitude, soon turned into an unbearable weight, casting a shadow over her every move, draining the joy from even the simplest of things. With the loss of her parents came the loss of her financial security, the support that had once allowed her to study without fear of bills or debt. The crushing weight of reality set in as bills piled up and her once bright future dimmed. The relentless demands of medical school, combined with the need to work long hours just to survive, left her utterly exhausted. Sleep became a rare luxury, and she found herself torn between studying and fighting off the deepening financial ruin. Her energy began to drain away, and it became painfully clear that she couldn't keep up the facade of having everything under control. It was during this fragile time that she met Christopher. He seemed like a balm to her wounds. Gentle, understanding, and full of the kind of charm that drew her in. He seemed to read her soul, to understand her pain in a way no one else could. He became her friend, her confidant during those difficult days. His presence was a reprieve, and he made her believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still hope, still a chance to smile again. Isadora allowed herself to trust him completely. She opened up to him, sharing her deepest fears, her wildest dreams, and her insecurities. She thought she had found love, found someone who would help her heal. But as time passed, the man she thought she knew began to change. The sweetness she had first experienced turned cold. He became possessive and manipulative. The gestures that once spoke of love became demands. The words of affection transformed into cruel accusations. Isadora, who had once felt secure in his embrace, now felt suffocated, trapped in a web of control. He slowly began to empty her account, taking small amounts without her noticing. By the time she discovered it, her savings were gone. One night, when she tried to confront him about the theft, Christopher revealed the full extent of his selfishness. His words were cutting, dismissive, and heartless. He mocked her naivete, laughing at the very notion of love he had once claimed to hold for her. "I never wanted you, Isadora," he said, his voice dripping with cruelty. "I wanted your money. I wanted to see you dependent on me, weak and broken." In that moment, her heart shattered. He left without a second glance, leaving her penniless, heartbroken, and alone. Betrayed in the worst possible way. As if the devastation wasn't enough, Isadora soon discovered she was pregnant. Aria was growing inside her, a life she hadn't planned for, but a life she would love and protect with everything she had left. With no emotional or financial support, and now burdened with the responsibilities of pregnancy, she found herself unable to continue her studies. She tried to find work, to start fresh, but each attempt was met with rejection and contempt. People looked at her with disdain, judging her for her misfortune. And New York City, once a place of dreams and opportunities, became a battleground. Every day was a struggle to survive, to keep going, to hold on to some semblance of hope. As she gazed down at Aria, the tears that had so often threatened to spill finally did, flowing silently down her cheeks. The weight of her struggles was always present, but Aria was her light. Her daughter was the one thing that made everything worth it. For Aria, Isadora endured the bitter cold of the streets, the exhaustion that made her bones ache, and the constant insecurity that plagued every day. Every night spent in the harsh realities of survival, every threat she faced was a silent burden she bore alone. But in front of her daughter, she would not let despair take root. She smiled, always hiding the fear, the worry, the growing weight of her sorrow. It was her promise to Aria, her silent vow, that her daughter would never bear the weight of her suffering. And now, in this mansion, warm, safe, and peaceful, a profound sense of gratitude began to well up inside Isadora. The memory of everything she had endured, the pain, the fear, the uncertainty, made Roman's act of generosity all the more poignant. He didn't know her story. He had no idea what she had gone through, and yet, in his silent kindness, he had given her a chance. A chance to breathe, to rest, to not have to fight for survival for one fleeting moment. He had extended his hand to her not out of obligation, but out of a rare and genuine impulse. A hand of hope, offering something she hadn't known she could have. A night of peace. A moment where the future didn't seem so terrifying. Isadora's mind searched for a way to thank him, but found no words. How could she express something so deep, so personal with mere words? It wasn't just the shelter he had given her, it was the freedom from suffering, a reprieve from a life where fear had often been her constant companion. It was a night when she could hold Aria close and sleep without the weight of anxiety pressing down on her chest. She closed her eyes for a moment, letting her mind drift back to simpler times. Her first day in college, the sound of her mother's laughter, the warmth of her parents' love that had once surrounded her. Her heart swelled with a deep, bittersweet nostalgia for a life she had lost. But in that moment, as she felt the weight of her daughter's small body curled against her own, she made a decision. She would not let this act of kindness fade into the background of her life like so many other fleeting moments of goodwill. Roman had given her something money could never replace. Proof that kindness still existed in a world that had often shown her its harshest side. She would carry that with her always, honoring it in every way she could. And so, in the stillness of the mansion, a resolve began to grow in Isadora's heart. She would start over. She didn't know how or what that would look like, but she had already faced the greatest obstacles of her life. With Aria in her arms and a renewed will in her heart, she knew she had the strength to move forward, no matter how difficult the road ahead would be. Roman might never understand the depth of her gratitude, but she promised herself that she would show him. She would make sure that his gesture of hope wasn't just a passing act of charity. He had given her a night of peace, and that peace would be her foundation as she fought to build something better for herself and her daughter. Roman's return came earlier than expected. His meeting, a crucial one that had the potential to shape his company's future, had been postponed unexpectedly. As he stepped into his mansion, he sensed something different in the air. An unusual warmth, a shift in the energy of the house that caught his attention. The house, usually so cold and silent, felt alive. The sounds of a soft laugh reached his ears, unmistakably a baby's giggle. Intrigued, he followed the sound, his footsteps soft on the polished floors. He found himself at the guest room corridor, where the slightly ajar door revealed a sight he hadn't anticipated. The room was bathed in the soft glow of afternoon light, creating a peaceful atmosphere that seemed to transform the space. Isadora was kneeling on the floor, her movements light and playful as she made a stuffed bear dance from side to side. Aria's delighted laughter filled the room as she tried, with all the determination a child could muster, to grab the toy. Isadora's face radiated a joy and affection so pure that, for a brief moment, Roman forgot who he was and where he was. It was as if this small, tender scene was too simple, too beautiful to belong to the stark reality of his life. Roman stood there for a few seconds, observing silently, feeling something stir within him, a warmth he didn't recognize, but that felt strangely familiar. The house, which had always seemed like a cold, imposing structure, now felt like a home. The presence of Isadora and Aria had transformed it, filling it with a coziness and humanity that Roman had never known he needed. A smile, unbidden, spread across his face, a soft, genuine smile. He didn't understand it, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a longing, a desire for something more than the endless cycle of work, meetings, and solitary ambition. He was so lost in the moment that he didn't realize Isadora had turned around, sensing his presence. She froze for a brief second, her eyes wide with surprise and a flicker of embarrassment, as if she feared she had overstepped. Quickly, she put the bear down, instinctively gathering Aria in her arms, though the little girl was still smiling blissfully, unaware of Roman's presence. Roman stepped into the doorway, his voice soft and encouraging. "No need to stop on my account," he said, his tone surprising even himself. He hadn't meant for his voice to sound so gentle. Isadora, still holding Aria, relaxed slightly, but her eyes betrayed her emotions. Surprise, gratitude, and something else. It was as if, in that brief exchange, she was seeing him in a way she hadn't before. The safety of his home, the kindness he had shown her, meant more than he could have imagined. And Roman, for the first time, understood the impact of his actions. Not as a wealthy man offering charity, but as a human being offering a simple, meaningful gift of peace. I didn't know you'd be back so soon," Isadora said, her voice trembling ever so slightly, yet there was a quiet dignity in her words. It wasn't a tone of apology, but of acknowledgement, of something deeper than just gratitude. Roman took a few measured steps closer, his gaze shifting to Aria. The child, sitting on the floor, looked up at him with wide, innocent eyes, her small hand reaching toward him in a gesture that held no fear. Without thinking, almost instinctively, Roman extended a finger, allowing her tiny fingers to wrap around it. Aria's touch was soft, fragile, yet full of warmth. The moment was simple, yet it carried a weight that surprised him, stirring something unexpected in his chest. A smile crept across his face, one that felt foreign and genuine all at once. He hadn't anticipated that such a small, innocent gesture could have such an effect on him. "She's amazing," Roman murmured, still looking at Isadora, who met his gaze with pride and a deep, unspoken love. "Yes, she is," Isadora replied, her voice thick with emotion. She pulled Aria closer to her chest, as if to shield her from a world that had shown them so little tenderness. "I don't know how to thank you. Having a safe night, a roof after so long, it felt like a dream." Roman felt the full weight of her words, and something shifted in him. He hadn't realized just how much that simple act of offering shelter had meant to her. It wasn't just about providing a roof. It was about offering something she had long been denied: peace, security, a brief reprieve from the unrelenting struggles of her life. Her gratitude cut through him in a way that made him realize how little he had allowed himself to feel in recent years. He wasn't just helping her. Somewhere along the way he had also helped himself. The house, the quiet laughter, the presence of Isadora and Aria, it was as if they had breathed life into a space that had always felt hollow. "Isadora," Roman said, his voice lowering, a rare sincerity slipping through his usual composure. "There's no need to thank me. Actually, I think I need this as much as you do." Isadora blinked, startled by his admission. A man like Roman, so powerful, so self-sufficient, needing something? It was a concept she had trouble grasping, but there, standing before her, he looked different, vulnerable even. It was an unspoken revelation, one that made her wonder about the weight of his own life, his own solitude, and for the first time she saw him not just as a benefactor, but as someone carrying a silent, unacknowledged burden of his own. She met his gaze, her heart softening. "Even so, I'm grateful," she whispered. "This place, this chance, it means more than I can say. After so many hardships, it's more than I could have ever asked for." As she held Arya closer, the weight of her relief was almost palpable. Roman's offer, to stay for as long as she needed, was more than just a gesture. It was a promise of safety, something she never imagined would be within her reach again. The cold nights, the constant fear, the uncertainty of where they would sleep next, those worries seemed a little lighter now, even if only for a brief moment. Under this roof, she found something she hadn't realized she was desperate for: stability. Roman's eyes lingered on Isadora, on the way she cradled Arya with such tender protectiveness. There was something about her, something quiet and unyielding, that he hadn't expected. A strength beneath the surface, but also a delicate pride that refused to break. Watching them together, he felt a pang of admiration mixed with an unfamiliar ache. She had endured so much, and yet there was no bitterness in her, no anger, only love for her daughter and a quiet resilience. How had she managed to keep that spark alive, he wondered. Before leaving, Roman couldn't help himself. He leaned down, brushing his fingers lightly over Arya's cheek. The child giggled, her tiny hand still clutching his finger, her smile radiant and unburdened. He felt a rush of tenderness in his chest, an emotion so rare that it took him by surprise. In that small, innocent moment, he realized something had shifted inside him. That touch, that laughter, it sparked something inside him, something he wasn't prepared for but couldn't deny. It was as if, for the first time in a long while, he felt seen. Isadora watched Roman leave, the echo of his footsteps fading down the hall. She was left standing there with Arya, a quiet sense of peace washing over her. Roman's generosity had given her more than shelter. It had given her an unspoken connection, a fleeting sense of acceptance. There was something invisible between them now, a thread that connected them in a way neither could articulate. She didn't know if Roman felt it too, but she knew that this moment would stay with her for a long time, and maybe, just maybe, it would change the course of things. Juliana Sinclair arrived at the mansion unannounced, her heels clicking confidently against the marble floors as she walked through the grand entrance. She had always moved through life with the assurance that everything, especially Roman's attention, was hers for the taking. As the heir to an empire nearly as powerful as Alexander's, Juliana had grown accustomed to getting what she wanted, and today, she was determined to reclaim what she believed was rightfully hers. She was likely to reach out right away to Roman. She had missed Roman more than she cared to admit, and believed that his absence, his recent distance, was merely a temporary distraction. He would understand her sudden visit, as he always had. She made her way through the opulent living room, the familiar luxury of the mansion a backdrop to her thoughts. Roman's study was at the end of the hall, and she found him sitting at his desk, reading through documents. At the sight of her, his eyes briefly flickered with restrained surprise, but he quickly masked it with a smile. "Juliana," Roman greeted her, his voice polite but edged with something else, something Juliana couldn't quite place. She noticed it, the slight tension in his posture, the subtle shift in his gaze, as if he were waiting for something. But that only fueled her confidence. "I missed you," she said, her voice dripping with charm. "I decided to drop by unannounced. I hope that's not a problem." Roman's smile didn't quite reach his eyes, and his gaze drifted, distracted, toward the hallway. Juliana raised an eyebrow. She knew him well enough to sense that something was different. The air between them was thick with an unspoken change, and for the first time, she wasn't entirely certain what it was. Before she could press him further, a faint sound, a soft giggle, drifted down the hallway from upstairs. It was unmistakable, the sound of a child's laughter. Juliana's attention snapped in that direction, and a flicker of irritation crossed her features. Roman caught the shift in her expression and, instead of stopping her as he normally might, allowed her to move past him. If Juliana was truly back in his life, she would have to accept that things were different now. Juliana followed the sound, her steps growing more purposeful. She turned the corner at the top of the stairs and found herself face to face with Isadora, who was holding Arya in her arms. At first, the sight caught Juliana off guard, her sharp eyes taking in every detail, every subtle movement. the warmth in Isadora's expression as she cradled Arya, the simple yet calm manner in which she stood. Everything about her screamed out of place in this mansion, this world. But it wasn't just that. There was something more, a nagging feeling of jealousy, of unease, that crawled up Juliana's spine. Isadora met her gaze with quiet composure, sensing the veiled hostility in the air before Juliana even spoke. Arya, with her innocent curiosity, looked up at the stranger, unaware of the tension thickening in the room. Juliana's eyes narrowed slightly, her lips curling into a mockingly sweet smile. "And who might you be?" she asked, her tone laced with a venomous edge. The words were a challenge, an unspoken declaration that this encounter was not one she welcomed. Isadora hesitated only for a moment, her mind racing for a response that would not escalate the situation. She could feel the underlying hostility in Juliana's words, but she held her ground. "I'm Isadora," she said softly, her voice steady. "And this is my daughter, Arya." A soft, almost humorless laugh bubbled up in Juliana's chest. She didn't hide her scrutiny, her eyes slowly tracing Isadora from head to toe, observing her simple clothes, her worn appearance. It was clear to Juliana that this woman, this stranger, was nothing more than a passing guest, someone beneath her. The judgment that colored Juliana's gaze was impossible to miss, and as she looked at Isadora, something darker began to stir within her. A cold, jealous fury at the thought of Roman, her Roman, showing any interest in someone so ordinary, so undeserving. Isadora could feel the weight of her gaze, but she refused to let the discomfort show. She had lived with judgment her entire life, and she wouldn't let someone like Juliana rattle her. After a moment that stretched on too long, Juliana turned sharply and walked back toward the study, her demeanor completely different now. Hardened, colder, laced with suspicion. She didn't look back at Isadora, but the disdain in her expression was palpable. When Juliana returned to the study, her eyes locked onto Roman with a mixture of accusation and unspoken resentment. "So," she began, her voice dripping with irony, "the young lady I found upstairs, is she your latest guest?" Roman stiffened at her words. The tone was unmistakable. Juliana wasn't just curious, she was threatened. There was an edge in her voice, a bite that Roman knew well from their past. He met her gaze, his features softening just slightly. He wasn't entirely sure how to navigate the shifting ground between them, but he knew one thing for certain. Things had changed. And no matter how much Juliana might try to claim her place in his life, it was clear now that his priorities had shifted. Roman remained calm, but he could feel the uncomfortable weight of Juliana's insistence pressing down on him. The more she pushed, the more her words gnawed at him. He knew the moment he opened his doors to Isadora and Arya, he was inviting trouble, but he hadn't anticipated how easily Juliana would seize on it. "Isadora and her daughter are going through a difficult time," Roman said, his voice steady but revealing a hint of defensiveness. "I offered to help." Juliana's eyes narrowed, her gaze cutting sharp as a knife. She couldn't hide her disbelief, or the mounting resentment. This was not what she expected. Alexander, the man she knew to be composed, controlled, now offering shelter to a stranger. She felt a gnawing jealousy, like a fire spreading through her chest, and she let it consume her. "Don't you think it's risky, Alexander?" Juliana pressed, her voice laced with a sharp edge. "Letting someone you barely know stay here? Who knows what kind of trouble they might bring?" Roman's gaze faltered slightly, but he quickly recovered, his jaw tightening. The seed of doubt Juliana planted began to sprout, and for the first time, he found himself questioning his decision. "Look at her, Alexander, a stranger with a child," Juliana continued, her words dripping with accusation. "An easy situation to manipulate to get what she wants. How do you know she's trustworthy?" Roman remained silent for a moment, the weight of Juliana's insinuations pressing down on him. He couldn't deny the discomfort her words stirred in him, and a flicker of uncertainty began to coil in his gut. He knew Isadora was honest. He wanted to believe that. But Juliana's sharp observations brought a cold, pragmatic logic to the table that he couldn't easily dismiss. The unease in his chest deepened. What if Juliana was right? Was he being reckless? Was his generosity being exploited? No matter how hard he tried to reject it, doubt gnawed at him. When he went upstairs to check on Isadora, the tension between them was immediate. As he entered the room, he saw her sitting with Arya, the little one nestled in her arms. The sight should have brought him comfort, but instead, there was a heaviness in the air, something unspoken that immediately put him on edge. Isadora looked up at him, the warmth in her eyes quickly replaced by unease. There was something different about him now, something colder that sent a chill through her. "Oh, Isadora," Roman began, his voice low, controlled but with an edge of tension. "I need to understand a bit more about your story. Is there something you haven't told me?" Isadora froze. The words hit her like a slap. The way he said it, so calm, so clinical, felt like judgment. A subtle accusation she hadn't expected from him. Her heart tightened in her chest. She had told him everything that mattered, hadn't she? But now, his gaze was too sharp, too scrutinizing, and the vulnerable place she had come to cherish in his presence seemed to evaporate. She stood up slowly, trying to steady herself. She held Arya close, her fingers trembling as she tried to keep her voice from faltering. "I've already told you everything that's important." Her voice was softer now, almost pleading. "I didn't want to take advantage of anything. I never asked for more than a roof, than safety for my daughter." Roman's eyes flicked over her face, watching every small shift in her expression. He could see the hurt, the defensiveness. Was she lying? He didn't think so. But Juliana's words had planted doubt, and now, the quiet struggle inside him was becoming impossible to ignore. Isadora saw the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes, and it felt like a gut punch. A sickening realization began to sink in. She had thought this refuge could last. She had hoped, foolishly, that maybe she could stay here for a while, find some peace. But seeing that doubt in his eyes, seeing the shift in his demeanor, made her heart drop. This kindness, this safety she had found, felt like it was slipping away. Her pride, always her silent shield, burned at the thought that she might be seen as unworthy, no better than a charity case. She knew she had no way of proving herself to him. What could she say now? With a final deep breath, she turned away slightly, cradling Arya tighter in her arms. The weight of her humiliation was unbearable. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice breaking slightly, but she refused to let him see the depth of her pain. "I didn't mean to cause any trouble." Without another word, she moved toward the door. Her steps felt heavier than they ever had before, as if each one was another confirmation that she didn't belong here. She couldn't stay in a place where even the smallest shred of acceptance was slipping through her fingers. Roman's eyes followed her, and for the briefest moment he felt something shift inside him. A guilt, a regret, an awareness that something important was slipping away. But the doubt, once planted, couldn't easily be erased. He stood still, watching her leave, his heart torn between the instinct to follow her and the weight of the decisions that had brought them to this moment. "I think I understand," Isadora said quietly, her voice firm but carrying a deep, hidden pain. "Thank you for the help, Alexander," she continued, her words steady though they trembled inside her. "But Arya and I have stayed long enough." Without waiting for his response, she held Arya close and walked out of the room, her back straight, her face a mask of dignity despite the storm inside her. Roman watched her leave, the quiet thud of the door closing behind her echoing like a final verdict. In the days that followed, Roman felt a growing restlessness gnaw at him. The mansion, once a fortress of solitude and order, now felt like a hollow shell. Every corner he turned, every echo of his own footsteps, reminded him of the warmth Isadora and Arya had brought with them. The sound of Arya's innocent laughter seemed to linger in the air, and he found himself yearning for it, as if it was a piece of himself he had lost. As he sat in his study, trying to focus on the documents scattered before him, his mind kept drifting back to her. He remembered how Isadora's smile had lightened the room, how she and Arya had filled the space with a warmth he hadn't realized he craved. He recalled the way Isadora had cared for her daughter with such tenderness, even in the midst of her own pain. The emptiness of the house became unbearable, and with it came a growing realization. He had misjudged her. The report from the investigator, when it arrived, felt like both a salvation and a wound. Roman opened it quickly, his hands trembling as he read, hoping to find the answers he so desperately sought. Isadora's story unfolded in stark, painful detail. Her early life full of promise, her parents' tragic deaths, the abuse she had suffered, and the strength with which she had fought to protect Arya. It was a tale of loss and survival, of a woman who had never asked for more than she needed and who had borne her burdens with quiet dignity. As Roman read, he felt something heavy settle in his chest. Isadora had never been manipulative, never sought anything from him but refuge. He had believed her to be someone less than she was, driven by fear and suspicion, and in doing so, he had betrayed her. The weight of his regret crushed him. He had let Juliana's words cloud his judgment, and in doing so, he had lost something far more valuable than he had ever realized. Roman's anger now turned inward, at himself for his pride and foolishness. He had allowed a woman like Juliana, cold, calculating, and manipulative, to cloud his judgment, and in the process, he had nearly lost the chance to be truly human, to be a man worthy of Isadora's kindness. And now, as he continued to read, he realized something else with painful clarity. Juliana had never truly been the woman he needed. What he had thought was love, he now recognized for what it was, an illusion, built on appearances and interests. The truth of her character sickened him. She was someone who had used him, who had exploited his vulnerabilities to maintain her own sense of power and control. In that moment, Roman knew what he had to do. He couldn't undo his mistakes, but he could try to make things right. He would find Isadora and Arya, and he would offer her more than just an apology. He would offer her the truth of his feelings, his gratitude, and the sincerity he had failed to show before. The thought of losing her forever was a reality Roman couldn't bear. He needed her warmth, her honesty, the way she had made him feel more alive, more connected to something real than he had in years. He asked the investigator to locate her, his mind racing with urgency. He couldn't wait any longer. He needed to act before he lost her for good. That night, as he lay awake, his mind replayed the moments they had shared. The laughter of Arya, the way Isadora had looked at him with gratitude and quiet strength, how she had trusted him when she had every reason to doubt. He promised himself he would find her and offer the apology she deserved. The quiet house felt even more desolate now, but somewhere in his chest, he felt a spark of hope. He wasn't the same man who had doubted her. He was ready to find her again, and this time, he wouldn't let her go. The next day, Roman received word of Isadora's whereabouts. The relief that surged through him was quickly followed by a knot of anxiety. He knew the journey ahead wouldn't be easy. He had no idea how she would react to seeing him again. Would she reject him outright, or would she hear him out, if only to send him away once more? But one thing was clear. No matter what happened, he had to try. For the first time in years, he felt like his heart was pulling him toward something real, toward her. Roman left for her location with a mix of anticipation and dread. His mind raced with the idea that this might be his last chance to make things right, to somehow earn back the trust he'd lost. Finding her was no longer just about correcting a mistake. It was about the possibility of something deeper, something he hadn't realized he needed until it was almost too late. Arriving at the address, he paused, steadying his breath. He had no illusions about the difficulty of what he was about to do. He was prepared for rejection, for Isadora to shut the door in his face, but the emptiness in his life since her and Arya's departure was unbearable. He couldn't let fear dictate his actions anymore. Isadora and Arya had become an essential part of him, and he was willing to fight for them, if they would let him. He knocked gently, the sound sharp in the quiet air. Moments later, the door opened, and there she was, Isadora, standing before him, her expression a mix of surprise and caution. Roman felt a pang in his chest. The woman he had wronged stood before him, and though he could see the caution in her eyes, he saw something else too, an openness, a possibility. "Isadora," he began, his voice quieter than he'd intended, the weight of emotion thick in his words. "I know I'm probably the last person you want to see right now, but I'm asking you, please, give me a chance to make things right. I made a terrible mistake. I let my doubts and insecurities get the better of me. I was unfair to you. Since you and Arya left, the house, my life, it's been empty without you." Roman's eyes searched hers, and though she remained silent, he saw the flicker of something in her, a hesitation, a pain, but also a softening. She didn't speak, but he could feel her listening, her heart still weighing his words. He pressed on, the vulnerability in his voice becoming more evident. "Isadora, you've given me a new perspective, a new way of seeing the world. I want you to know that I'm not just here to apologize. I'm here to ask you something important. I want you, and Arya to come back, to stay, not as guests, but as part of my life, as part of our lives. I want to give you both the home you deserve, a place where you can be happy and safe and loved." Isadora's breath caught in her throat, her hands trembled slightly, and for a moment she looked away, trying to steady herself. Arya, sensing the tension, had been playing near the door but now looked up with innocent curiosity. Isadora's gaze softened as she watched her daughter, and in that quiet moment memories of her struggles, the cold nights, the hunger, the isolation, flooded her mind. But so too did the brief, fragile moments of hope. The words Roman spoke, though painful to hear, were laced with sincerity, and they resonated deep within her. Could she allow herself to believe in the possibility of a fresh start? For so long, she had fought to protect Arya from the world's cruelties. But now, standing here, she realized that maybe she could offer her daughter something more. A true home, a place of security and love. Looking back at Roman, Isadora saw the raw honesty in his eyes. In that moment, she knew that accepting his offer wasn't just an emotional decision. It was a chance to heal, to build something that she and Arya had never had before. Before she could say anything, Arya toddled toward Roman, drawn to him with an innocence that could not be denied. The little girl reached out her arms, a simple, spontaneous gesture that made Roman's chest tighten with emotion. Without thinking, he knelt down, his heart racing, as Arya's small hands touched his face. Her innocent trust, her open affection, was a balm to the wounds he had inflicted. Isadora watched this exchange, her heart a mixture of hope and fear, and in that moment, she felt the weight of her decision more than ever. "Uncle Alex, are you coming with us?" Arya asked, her soft voice filled with a mixture of excitement and hope. Her wide, innocent eyes looked up at him with such earnest anticipation that Alexander's heart skipped a beat. Dropping to one knee to be eye level with her, he opened his arms, gathering her into a tender embrace. "Yes, my little one," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll come with you, forever." The pure, unguarded affection in Arya's gesture stirred something deep within Isadora's heart, unraveling a knot she hadn't realized had been tied so tightly. It was as if her daughter's innocent trust was giving her permission to believe in new beginnings, to finally open herself to the possibility of a future that held love and hope. A small, quiet smile tugged at her lips as she watched the interaction, and when Roman met her gaze, he saw a quiet understanding reflected in her eyes, as well as a newfound tenderness. "I accept, Alexander," Isadora said, her voice thick with emotion, each word carefully weighed. Her heart, still cautious, carried a quiet strength, and she added one condition that was as much for herself as it was for him. "But what we build, it must be real. There can be no room for fear, no place for doubt, and no more distrust." Alexander nodded solemnly, his eyes glistening with unspoken emotion. A single tear slid down his cheek, though he made no effort to wipe it away. "I promise you, Isadora, I swear to you, we will build this together, and nothing, no one, will ever take that from us," he vowed, pulling her into his embrace. In that moment, as he held her, Roman felt an overwhelming sense of certainty. It was as though a new chapter in his life was beginning, one filled with the kind of love and trust that was stronger than any doubts or fears that had plagued him before. When they finally returned to the mansion together, the once cold and sterile atmosphere that had defined the space now seemed transformed. Arya's laughter, pure and unburdened, echoed through every room, filling the house with a warmth it had never known. Isadora's gaze, once clouded with uncertainty, now shone brightly with peace and serenity. In her eyes, Roman saw the reflection of the happiness and tranquility he had longed for, the kind he had thought was out of his reach. Upon hearing of their reconciliation, Victoria, no longer Juliana, not in this moment, was forced to confront the bitter reality of her defeat. It wasn't just Roman she had lost. It was the life she had imagined she would share with him, a life built on hollow appearances and control. She had lost him to something far more profound, a family founded on sincerity, trust, and unconditional love. Defeated, humiliated, and now fully aware that she would never again hold the place in his heart she once believed was hers, Juliana left the mansion, never to return. In the days that followed, Roman offered Isadora a position in his company, not just as a gesture of goodwill, but because he knew she deserved a place where she could flourish professionally. He would support her every step of the way, just as he had promised. Together, they began to carve out a genuine life, one built on mutual respect and trust. The kind of foundation Roman had once thought was too fragile to hold. For Aria, Roman became something more than just a protector. He became the father figure she had so desperately needed. In caring for her, Roman discovered a new sense of purpose, one that filled the void in his life in ways he hadn't anticipated. Then, one bright and sunny afternoon, as they played together in the garden, Aria, her face lit up with innocent joy, turned to Roman and called him Dad for the first time. Roman's heart swelled with an emotion so powerful it took his breath away. In that moment, he realized that this was the greatest title he had ever received. It wasn't a title born of obligation or expectation. It was a title built on love, trust, and a bond that could never be broken. Each passing day, he grew more certain that the life they were building together was everything he had been seeking. A life where love was constant, where happiness wasn't just a fleeting moment, but something they could rely on every single day. Alexander, Isadora, and Aria, once strangers to one another, had now become a family where trust blossomed and where love and hope were nurtured with every sunrise. And so, surrounded by the laughter, warmth, and joy of a life full of purpose and promise, Alexander, Isadora, and Aria moved forward, each day creating a future more beautiful than they had ever imagined. The past was nothing but a distant memory, and the present, the life they were building together, was a promise they renewed with every new day. Did you enjoy this story? If so, drop a like and leave a kind comment to encourage us. Your support means the world. And don't forget, we love you.